Black Waitress's daughter ran to the billionaire CEO, crying, "They took my brother." Then he did this. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The evening started like any other at the upscale restaurant, Waitress Lounge, nestled in the heart of San Francisco's bustling downtown. The soft murmur of polite conversations filled the air, accompanied by the clinking of fine glassware and the light tapping of heels against polished marble floors. But beneath the elegant surface, something was brewing. Naomi Carter, a waitress in her late 20s, had been working tirelessly for hours. Dressed in the restaurant's signature black attire, her apron tied neatly around her waist, she moved gracefully between the tables, always careful not to draw attention to herself. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it was what she needed to keep her family afloat. She had long ago learned the art of blending into the background, unnoticed by most of the high society patrons who dined there. Yet tonight, things were different. Naomi's mind wasn't fully on her work. Her younger brother, Jamal, had been acting strange all day. He hadn't returned her texts, and when she tried calling, his phone went straight to voicemail. It worried her, but she tried to push the nagging feeling aside. She had a job to do, after all. But as the night wore on, the sense of unease grew stronger. She glanced at the clock, 10 minutes until her shift would end, and made her way to the back to check on her phone one last time. That was when she heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder. Her daughter, Amara, had been sitting at the back of the lounge, as she often did after school, waiting for her mother's shift to end. But this time, it wasn't Amara's usual quiet presence that Naomi noticed. It was the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps, and then the voice of Amara herself, crying out. "They took my brother." Amara's voice echoed through the hallway, and Naomi's heart dropped. Without thinking, she rushed towards her daughter, only to find her standing at the door, her face pale, eyes wide with panic. Naomi knelt down, grabbing her daughter by the shoulders. "What happened, honey? What do you mean, they took Jamal?" Amara, tears streaming down her face, gasped for breath as she tried to explain. I saw them. 2 men, they just grabbed him. I didn't know what to do." Naomi felt a chill run through her. She had no idea who they were, but one thing was clear, her brother was in danger. Amara was trembling in her arms, and for a moment, Naomi didn't know what to do. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. Richard Kessler, the billionaire CEO, known for his razor-sharp business deals and his intimidating presence. He sat at a table nearby, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding just a few feet away. Naomi hesitated for only a second before making a decision. She turned to Amara. "Stay here, baby. I'll take care of this." Without another word, Naomi sprinted across the room, her heels clicking against the floor. She reached Kessler's table in what felt like no time at all. "Mr. Kessler," she said, her voice shaking, "I need your help. They've taken my brother." The words hit Richard like a thunderclap. He looked up, initially confused, then something in his eyes shifted. He looked down at the young woman before him, her hands trembling with desperation. He could see the fear in her eyes, the urgency of her plea. For a moment, it was as though time had stopped. Richard had heard the rumors about Naomi, the quiet waitress, the one who always kept to herself, who had a daughter who was too young to be here. But in this moment, the world around him seemed to fade away. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Naomi, still shaking, nodded toward the door. "I don't know who they are, but I need your resources. I need to find him before it's too late." Naomi's heart was pounding in her chest as she turned back toward Richard Kessler. His calm response had caught her off guard, and yet she could see the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't just offering words. There was a determination behind his gaze. She had no idea who the men were that had taken her brother, but she knew one thing for certain. They weren't going to get away with it. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadying just a little. "I don't know what they want or who they are, but I have to find Jamal." Richard nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I have resources," he said. "We'll get him back." Naomi didn't question him. She had no time to waste. The air in the restaurant felt thick now, charged with the weight of the situation. People around them continued to eat, oblivious to the chaos unfolding, but for Naomi, the world had narrowed to a single, urgent task, getting her brother back. Richard's phone call was short, but it was enough to set things into motion. Naomi could hear him give precise instructions to his security team, ordering them to track down every lead, every piece of information. It was clear that Richard's power extended far beyond the walls of his company, and he was using it all to help her. As she stood there, anxiety buzzing through her body, she realized how much she had underestimated the man sitting before her. He wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was someone who, for reasons Naomi couldn't understand, was willing to risk his time, his resources, and maybe even his reputation for her. The man who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, was now taking action in a way Naomi couldn't have imagined. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, hoping it was news about Jamal. But it was a message from Amara. "Mom, I'm scared. What's happening? Where's Jamal?" Naomi's heart sank, but she quickly typed back, "I'm doing everything I can. I'll be home soon. Stay safe." She sent the message and slipped the phone back into her pocket, trying to focus on the situation at hand. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited for word from Richard's team. Every second felt like an eternity. Naomi paced back and forth, her mind racing with 100 different thoughts. Where could they have taken him? Why had they taken him? Was Jamal safe? The worst-case scenarios ran through her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She didn't want to think about what might be happening to her brother, but she couldn't stop herself. Richard stood beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. He didn't ask questions, didn't make her talk. He just stood there, his eyes scanning the room as he waited for the call that would bring them closer to finding Jamal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Richard's phone buzzed. He answered it immediately, his expression hardening as he listened. "Where?" he asked. "Get her everything she needs." He hung up the phone and turned to Naomi. "We have a lead," he said. "They've been spotted near the docks. It's a long shot, but we're going to check it out." Naomi felt a surge of hope rise within her, but it was quickly replaced by fear. The docks. It was a dark, isolated part of town, a place where people disappeared and no one asked questions. She knew the area well. It was the last place she wanted Jamal to be, but it was their best chance. Without hesitation, she nodded. "Let's go." Richard didn't waste any time. He led her through the back of the restaurant, where his car was waiting. The drive to the docks was tense, the silence between them filled with the heavy weight of anticipation. Naomi's mind was spinning. What if they were too late? What if they couldn't find him in time? As the city lights faded behind them and the industrial landscape of the docks came into view, Naomi's heart raced. This was it. This was where her brother's fate would be decided. Richard's car slowed as they approached the warehouse district, a maze of old buildings and empty lots. The place looked abandoned, the streets eerily quiet. Naomi felt a chill run through her as they parked and stepped out. "Stay close," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "We're not sure what we're walking into." Naomi nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had to stay strong, for Jamal, for her family. Together, they moved through the darkened streets, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Naomi's breath came in short, shallow bursts, her mind racing with possibilities. But she kept her focus on the task at hand, finding her brother, bringing him home. They reached the entrance of a large, dimly lit warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and Naomi could hear muffled voices from inside. Richard motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for him to make his move. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for, and she could only pray that they were in time to save Jamal from whatever danger lurked inside. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension. Every breath Naomi took felt heavier than the last. Richard moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room, every corner a potential threat. Naomi's pulse was pounding in her ears as she stayed close behind him, her heart racing with both fear and hope. She couldn't let herself think about what might happen if they failed to find Jamal in time. This was their only chance. As they entered the building, the muffled voices grew louder, and Naomi could make out the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. She felt a tight knot form in her stomach. They were close. Richard gave her a quick, silent signaled to stop, his hand held up to indicate that they should wait. Naomi nodded, her eyes darting from one shadowy figure to another, trying to catch a glimpse of her brother. A single beam of light from a flickering overhead bulb illuminated a small part of the room, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The voices grew clearer, and Naomi's stomach churned with the fear that it was Jamal's voice she was hearing. Richard moved ahead cautiously, his steps almost inaudible, while Naomi followed, her heart thumping in her chest. They reached the far side of the warehouse, and Richard paused by a large steel door, peeking through the cracks. Naomi could see two men standing just beyond, arguing about something. They didn't notice Richard or Naomi, lost in their own conversation. She felt her breath catch in her throat as she strained to hear. "I don't care what you think. He's going to pay," one of the men said, his voice low but angry. "We're doing this whether you like it or not." Naomi felt her blood run cold. They were talking about Jamal. She had to act quickly. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her body shaking with adrenaline. Richard grabbed her arm to stop her, but it was too late. She was already rushing toward the men. "Where is he?" Naomi demanded, her voice loud and firm. The two men turned, clearly startled by her sudden appearance. They looked her up and down, as if surprised that someone like her had dared confront them. "You're in the wrong place, lady," one of them sneered. "You need to leave." Naomi's eyes narrowed. "Not until you tell me where my brother is." The man laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Your brother? Oh, he's not your concern anymore." Naomi felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She couldn't let them get away with this. She pushed forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Tell me where he is. Now." The second man stepped forward, his hand reaching for something in his jacket. Naomi's breath hitched. Was he going to hurt her? But before the man could make a move, Richard was already there, his presence like a force of nature. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Richard's voice was cold, his tone carrying a power that made the men hesitate. The man froze, his hand still hovering over his jacket. "You really want to find out who I am?" Richard asked, his voice quiet but menacing. "I think you should step aside." The man slowly lowered his hand, his eyes shifting between Richard and Naomi. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice defensive. "Someone who doesn't take kindly to threats," Richard replied, his gaze unwavering. The tension in the room was palpable, but in that moment, Naomi felt something shift. The men seemed to realize they were out of their depth. Naomi's eyes burned with determination. "Where is Jamal?" she demanded again. The men exchanged a nervous glance. After a long pause, the first man spoke, his voice clipped. "He's upstairs. In the back." Naomi didn't wait for anything else. Without a word, she turned and started toward the stairs. Richard followed, his steps quick and sure. They climbed the narrow staircase at the far end of the room, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent building. Naomi's heart was racing again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was hope. They were so close now. She could feel it. They reached the top of the stairs and turned into another hallway, which led to a door at the end. It was closed, but a small crack of light shone through, signaling someone was inside. Naomi approached the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then pushed. The door opened. The sight that greeted her was almost too much to bear. Jamal was sitting on the floor, his arms bound to a chair, but he was alive. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Naomi felt a rush of relief flood through her. "Jamal!" she cried, rushing toward him. He looked up at her, his face pale, but his expression filled with relief. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I knew you'd come." Richard stepped into the room behind her, surveying the situation quickly. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice calm and commanding. Naomi quickly moved to untie Jamal, her hands trembling as she worked. The ropes came undone faster than she expected, and soon, Jamal was free. She pulled him into a tight hug, holding him as if she might never let go. It wasn't just the physical relief that overwhelmed her. It was the emotional weight of everything they had been through. They were safe, together, and it was all thanks to Richard Kessler, a man who had no obligation to help, but had chosen to stand by them when it mattered most. As Naomi and Jamal made their way out of the dark warehouse, the air outside felt like a breath of fresh air after being submerged underwater for too long. The sound of rain pattering on the pavement, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional crack of thunder in the distance made it feel like the world outside had continued moving, unaware of the chaos they had just escaped. Richard was right behind them, keeping a vigilant watch on their surroundings. Naomi could feel her heart pounding, but this time it was with relief, not fear. She had her brother back, and he was safe. That was all that mattered. Once they reached Richard's car, Jamal collapsed into the back seat, still weak from the ordeal but visibly relieved. Naomi sat beside him, holding his hand, making sure he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Richard climbed into the front seat, starting the car with a smooth hum as he pulled away from the docks. The drive back to the restaurant was quiet, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a shared understanding, a quiet gratitude for what had just happened. Naomi couldn't stop glancing at Jamal in the rearview mirror. His eyes were closed, but she could see the faintest smile on his face. It wasn't the carefree smile of a young boy who didn't know the weight of the world. It was the smile of someone who had been through hell and come out on the other side. When they arrived at the restaurant, Naomi led Jamal to the small apartment above the kitchen that she had been calling home. It was nothing extravagant, but it was theirs. She helped him to the couch, and as he sank into the cushions, she noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. She couldn't blame him. He had been through more in the past few hours than most people experience in a lifetime. Richard followed them inside, his expression as calm as ever. "You need anything else?" he asked, his tone as neutral as it had been throughout the entire ordeal. Naomi looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "No, She stopped herself, not quite sure how to express everything she was feeling. "Thank you," she finally said. "For everything." Richard nodded, his gaze softening just a bit. "It's nothing. I couldn't let you go through this alone." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. It was strange, feeling so deeply grateful to someone who had been a complete stranger just hours ago. Richard had done more than just help them find Jamal. He had given her hope, a sense of security, a reminder that there were people out there who cared. For a moment, Naomi felt like she could finally breathe. But then her phone buzzed, and she snapped back to reality. She pulled it from her pocket, her hand still shaking slightly. It was a message from Amara. "Are you okay? I'm so scared." Naomi smiled faintly, feeling a twinge of warmth in her chest. Amara had been the one constant in her life, the one person she could always count on. "I'm okay," she replied quickly, her fingers typing out the message with ease. "Jamal's okay too." She hit send, then looked back at Richard, who was still standing by the door, as if waiting for permission to leave. "Do you need to go?" Naomi asked, her voice a little softer now. Richard hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I've got things to take care of, but I'll check in on you later." With that, he turned to leave, but before he did, he stopped and glanced back over his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Naomi." His voice was sincere, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a wave of appreciation wash over her. He hadn't just saved her brother. He had shown her kindness when she least expected it. "Thank you, Richard," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. He gave her a small, reassuring smile before leaving, his footsteps fading down the hall. Naomi sat beside Jamal on the couch, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might be able to face it. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle as she rubbed Jamal's arm. He nodded, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Yeah, just tired. But I'm good." Naomi leaned back, her hand resting on his shoulder, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Everything was calm, and she held on to that peace, knowing that no matter what came next, they had each other. The following days passed in a blur of relief and lingering tension. Naomi spent every moment she could with Jamal, making sure he was recovering from the trauma and the exhaustion of his ordeal. He had been through so much, but he was finally home. The fear in his eyes had slowly begun to fade, replaced with a quiet strength. But even in the comfort of her apartment above the restaurant, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. She knew that the people behind Jamal's kidnapping weren't done. They couldn't be. The city felt different now, as though the shadows were closer than they had ever been before. Richard had been true to his word. He checked in on them every day, making sure they were safe, making sure Jamal was getting the care he needed. Naomi couldn't believe the kindness Richard had shown them. especially after everything that had happened. He didn't know her anything, but he had stepped into their lives and made a difference when no one else would. It was more than just the resources he provided. It was the genuine care he showed. He wasn't just the billionaire CEO of Kessler Tech. He was someone who understood that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change everything. It was a lesson Naomi had learned the hard way. It was late. One afternoon, when Naomi's phone buzzed, the screen lit up with a text from Richard. "Meet me at the office. I have something important to discuss with you." Naomi looked down at the message for a moment, uncertain. She had been staying away from Kessler Tech's headquarters for a reason. It felt too close to the danger she had just escaped. But she knew Richard wouldn't ask her to come unless it was important. She glanced over at Jamal, who was sitting on the couch, watching television. He was doing better, but Naomi could tell he still had a long way to go. "Jamal," she said, her voice steady but calm, "I have to go out for a little while. Richard needs to talk to me about something." Jamal turned his head to look at her, his face thoughtful. "Are you sure it's okay to leave? After everything?" Naomi nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm sure. I'll be back soon." Richard's office was on the top floor of a sleek, modern building downtown. It stood tall above the city, its glass windows reflecting the skyline. Naomi entered the lobby, her heart beating a little faster than usual. It wasn't the building that made her anxious. It was the uncertainty of what Richard wanted to discuss. She had no idea what it could be, but she knew one thing. It had to be important. The elevator doors opened, and Richard was standing there, waiting for her. His expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something Naomi couldn't quite place. "Naomi, thanks for coming," Richard said, his voice warm but laced with something heavier. "I have a proposition for you." Naomi's eyebrows furrowed. "A proposition?" she repeated, unsure what to make of it. Richard nodded. "I know you've been through a lot recently, and I want to help. But it's not just about helping you with Jamal. I want to offer you a job at Kessler Tech." Naomi blinked, taken aback. A job? At the company that had once rejected her without a second glance. She couldn't believe it. "I don't understand," she said, her voice quiet. "Why would you offer me a job?" Richard smiled, and for the first time, Naomi saw a trace of vulnerability in his expression. "Because you're more than just a waitress, Naomi. You're smart, driven, and you've got a lot of potential. I've seen that firsthand. I know you've been through the worst, and I think it's time you had a chance to thrive. You don't have to stay in the shadows anymore." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had worked so hard for so many years, doing everything she could just to get by. She had never imagined that something like this could happen, someone offering her an opportunity that could change the course of her life. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for anything like this," she admitted, her voice unsure. "I don't have the experience." Richard shook his head, his eyes full of confidence. "That's not what matters. What matters is what you're capable of. What you've shown me already." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "We're looking for someone who understands people, someone with empathy, someone who can think outside the box. I think you're that person." Naomi stood there, stunned. She didn't know how to respond. This was a dream she hadn't dared to dream. She had always been the one who worked in the background, never expecting recognition, never expecting anything more than survival. But here, in this moment, it was all laid out in front of her. Richard was offering her a chance to change her life. She took a deep breath, looking Richard in the eyes. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I'll take the job." Richard smiled, his eyes brightening. "Good. You won't regret this." Naomi's heart raced as she walked out of the building later that day. She had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. She was stepping into a new world, a world where she could be more than just a waitress, a world where her potential could finally be recognized. As she walked down the busy streets of San Francisco, the city no longer felt like a place she was just passing through. It felt like home. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi believed in herself again. Naomi's first week at Kessler Tech felt like a whirlwind. Every day was a new challenge, a new experience, but it was also everything she had hoped for. She sat at a desk in an open office space, surrounded by people who were not only smart but kind. It was a world that was foreign to her, where people didn't look down on her for where she came from, but saw her for who she was. Her first few days were filled with training, meetings, and learning the ins and outs of the company's operations. It was a lot to take in, But Naomi had always been a quick learner. She picked up new concepts faster than most people, and before long, she found herself making contributions that impressed even the most experienced members of the team. Richard had been true to his word, taking her under his wing and giving her the opportunity to shine. It wasn't just his generosity that stood out. It was the way he believed in her when no one else had. There were moments when Naomi felt out of place, like she didn't belong. In those moments, she would remember the people she had worked with before, the ones who had treated her like nothing more than a servant. But here, in this new world, she wasn't invisible. She had a voice. She had ideas. And for the first time, she had the chance to make a difference. As the days passed, Naomi grew more confident. She found herself speaking up in meetings, offering insights that were both valuable and unique. The team began to rely on her, and soon enough, she was leading projects that pushed her to think in ways she never had before. It was a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced, and it felt good. One evening, after another long day of work, Naomi found herself sitting in a coffee shop, scrolling through her phone. She was about to send a message to Amara when she saw a familiar name in her inbox, Ethan Monroe. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him since the night at the warehouse, and now, here he was, reaching out. She hesitated before opening the message, unsure of what to expect. Naomi, I know this may seem strange, but I've been thinking about what happened. I owe you an apology. I know I didn't treat you right before, and I want to make it up to you. Naomi stared at the screen, her mind racing. She hadn't expected an apology from Ethan, let alone one that was so sincere. The memory of him, the man who had once dismissed her without a second thought, now felt like a distant memory. She could still hear his words from that night. You don't look like the face we want for our next innovation campaign. Those words had hurt, but they also fueled her determination to prove him wrong. Naomi took a deep breath before replying. I appreciate your apology, Ethan, but I've moved on. I don't hold grudges. I'm just focused on moving forward. She paused for a moment, then added, I hope you're doing well. She hit send, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It was time to let go of the past. Later that week, Naomi found herself sitting in Richard's office, going over some numbers for an upcoming presentation. The door opened, and she looked up to see him standing there, holding a coffee cup in his hand. Mind if I join you? He asked with a smile. Naomi gestured to the empty chair. Of course, Richard. Have a seat. As he sat down across from her, she couldn't help but notice how comfortable the two of them had become. It wasn't just about work anymore. They had developed a friendship, a mutual respect that went beyond the walls of the office. How's everything going? Richard asked, his tone casual but sincere. Naomi smiled. Better than I ever imagined. I didn't think I'd be able to keep up, but I'm really starting to feel like I belong here. Richard nodded. I knew you would. You've got something special, Naomi. Don't ever forget that. Naomi felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. It wasn't just the words he said, it was the belief he had in her. Richard had given her more than just a job. He had given her the chance to redefine her future. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt like she was in control of her destiny. As she sat there, talking with Richard about the future, she realized that her journey was just beginning. She had overcome so much to get here, but now, the possibilities were endless. Naomi was no longer the waitress in the shadows. She was a woman with purpose, a woman with a voice, and most importantly, a woman who had finally found her place in the world. Naomi's life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. The weeks that followed her first days at Kessler Tech were filled with challenges, but also with growth and opportunity. As she settled into her role, it became clear that her potential was limitless. Richard's belief in her was more than just encouragement. It was the driving force that kept her moving forward. She was no longer the woman who worked tirelessly just to survive. She was now someone who could make a difference. One afternoon, as Naomi walked into the office, she was met with a familiar, yet unexpected, sight. Ethan Monroe, the CEO of Monroe Tech, was standing in the lobby, talking to one of Richard's colleagues. He looked up as Naomi approached, his expression guarded. For a moment, Naomi froze. She hadn't seen him since that night, and the memory of their last encounter was still fresh in her mind. She wasn't sure how to feel. Was he here to apologize again? Was he here to try and make amends for the way he had treated her? Naomi, Ethan said, his voice a little more tentative than she remembered. Can we talk? Naomi hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't sure what he wanted, but she had learned long ago that sometimes the hardest conversations were the ones that needed to happen. They walked to a quiet corner of the office, where Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. I know I've said this before, but I owe you an apology. I've been thinking a lot about that night, and I realize now how wrong I was. Not just about you, but about everything. Naomi crossed her arms, listening intently. I didn't know how to handle someone like you. Someone who had the potential to be more than just another employee. I saw you as a threat, and I treated you like one. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Naomi looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't the apology she had expected. It was real. It was honest. But she didn't know if it was enough. And what do you want from me now? She asked, her voice steady but guarded. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I understand what you're capable of, and I regret not seeing it sooner. Naomi's heart was conflicted. She wasn't sure if she should accept his apology, or if it was just another ploy to get back in her good graces. But then again, she had spent so much of her life holding on to grudges, letting anger and resentment fester. Maybe it was time to let go. I appreciate your apology, Ethan, she said, her voice softening. But I've moved on. I'm not the same person I was back then. Ethan nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I know. I can see that. You've done things that I could never have imagined, and I respect you for it. Naomi took a step back, her thoughts still racing. Thank you, but I've got my own path now, and I'm going to follow it. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Ethan's apology wasn't something she had expected, but it was something she had needed. She had been carrying that weight for so long, and now it was gone. Naomi had proven herself. She had made her mark at Kessler Tech, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. As she returned to her desk, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There were more projects to lead, more challenges to overcome. But she was ready. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman with a future she had built with her own hands. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Richard, meeting in 10 minutes. We've got an important client presentation to prepare. Naomi smiled. It wasn't just any presentation. It was one she had worked on for weeks. It was her chance to show just how far she had come. As she walked into the conference room, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She was ready. The woman who had once been overlooked, dismissed, and judged was now at the table, ready to lead. She had earned her place, and nothing was going to take that away from her. The presentation was a turning point for Naomi. She stood in the boardroom at Kessler Tech, facing a room full of top executives, potential investors, and, of course, Richard. The room buzzed with energy, but Naomi's focus was razor-sharp. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, pouring every ounce of energy she had into making sure everything went perfectly. It wasn't just about the business deal they were about to seal. It was about proving, once and for all, that she belonged in this world. Richard had given her the reins to present, and now it was time to show what she could do. Naomi took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium, the familiar weight of nervousness settling in her chest. But as she looked around the room, she didn't see powerful men or intimidating investors. She saw her colleagues, her team, the people who had supported her every step of the way. She felt a surge of confidence. Good afternoon, everyone, she began, her voice steady, the words flowing with ease. Thank you for being here today. We have a unique opportunity before us, one that I believe will set the tone for the next phase of Kessler Tech's growth. As she spoke, Naomi could see the investors' eyes following her every word, their expressions serious but engaged. This wasn't just a pitch. This was Naomi's chance to shine, to prove that she had earned her place at the table. The data on the screen behind her painted a clear picture of the potential success of their new product. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the people, the customers they were serving, the employees they were empowering, the communities they were impacting. Naomi spoke with passion about the vision behind Kessler Tech's next big step, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was truly in her element. The presentation flowed smoothly, and Naomi could feel the momentum building with every passing minute. By the time she reached the conclusion, she was completely in control, delivering the final points with conviction. This project isn't just an investment in technology, she said. It's an investment in people. It's an investment in the future. And I believe, with your partnership, we can take Kessler Tech to new heights. She finished with a smile, her heart pounding in her chest, but with a sense of calm that only came from knowing she had done her best. The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause started. It wasn't loud or exaggerated, but it was there, respectful, genuine. Richard stood up first, clapping, a proud smile on his face. Naomi's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she saw something in his gaze, something that told her he was proud of her, too. The investors began to speak among themselves, murmuring in agreement, their faces softening as they discussed the numbers, the vision, and the potential. Naomi stood there, watching them, knowing this was the moment that would change everything for her. The next few days flew by in a blur of emails, meetings, and phone calls. The deal was officially signed, and Naomi's role at Kessler Tech was solidified. She was no longer just the new hire. She was a leader, someone who had earned the trust and respect of those around her. Richard took her aside after the deal was finalized. "You did great," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I knew you had it in you." Naomi smiled back, feeling the weight of everything she had worked for finally lift. But even as she basked in the success of the presentation, she knew there was more to come. She wasn't finished yet. There was still so much she wanted to do, so many people she wanted to help, and so much more she wanted to prove. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but Naomi had learned that she was capable of facing any challenge head-on. She had come so far from the woman who once felt invisible, and now, she was ready to make a real impact. As she walked out of the office that evening, the city lights shining brightly ahead of her, Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had earned this. And the future? It was hers for the taking. As the weeks went on, Naomi's life continued to evolve in ways she had never imagined. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities, and a sense of growth she had never felt before. She was thriving at Kessler Tech, her role in the company becoming more influential with each passing week. Her days were now filled with meetings, presentations, and collaborations with people who had once seemed so far out of reach. Yet, Naomi was no longer the woman who had started out uncertain, unsure of where she fit in. She was a leader now, someone whose voice mattered, whose ideas were valued. Even as her success grew, Naomi never forgot where she came from. She often thought about the struggles she had faced, the long hours working as a waitress, the rejection from the tech world, the times she had doubted herself. It was those experiences that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She carried them with her, not as a burden, but as a reminder of how far she had come. One evening, as Naomi walked out of the office after a late meeting, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The city of San Francisco stretched out before her, its lights twinkling in the distance, a stark contrast to the small, dimly lit restaurant where she had spent countless hours working just a few months ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. Naomi paused for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over her. She realized that this was only the beginning. She had made it through the hardest part, but there was still so much more to accomplish. She wasn't just working for herself anymore. She was working to inspire others, to show them that anything was possible. She had once been the one who was invisible, the one who had been underestimated, the one who had been told she didn't belong. Now, she was the one who was making a difference, who was setting an example for others to follow. Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a text from Jamal. "How's everything going? I'm proud of you, sis." She smiled as she read the message. Jamal had come a long way too. After the kidnapping, he had taken time to heal, but he had also found a new sense of purpose. He was working on his own goals now, pushing himself to be the best version of himself, just as Naomi had done. "I'm proud of you too, Jamal," she typed back, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "We're both doing this." She hit send and stood there for a moment, taking in the night. She had been given a second chance, and she was going to make the most of it. Naomi didn't need validation from anyone anymore. She knew her worth, and she was ready to keep proving it. A few months ago, she had never dreamed of standing here, of being the person who was now in control of her future. But as she looked ahead, she realized she was only just beginning to scratch the surface of what she was capable of. As she walked down the street, the city around her felt different. It wasn't just a place she passed through, it was a place where she belonged. Naomi had found her place in the world, and she was ready to take it to the next level. She wasn't just another story of overcoming adversity. She was a story of transformation, of finding strength where it seemed there was none. And as the world continued to move forward, Naomi would keep moving with it, her head held high, her heart full of purpose, and her eyes fixed firmly on the future. This was her time. She was no longer just a woman working to survive. She was a woman who was going to change the world.